So, are we okay back there with translation? Priya? We will see. Okay? Well, if you need me to speak louder or whatever, please let me know. And if you need me to speak slower, let me know. And if those of you who generally understand English get lost, let me know. I'm sorry I'm not a speaker of Relatsi music. Do we have a copy of this book that you can show?
Okay, we can.
Oh. Evo. Okay. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Shimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Nityaname Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pachatyale Shradarine Manchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Yarevacham Patitam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagapate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindaneshwari Vrishabha Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Some of you may be feeling, well, it's a little crowded in here, but rest assured, if this were India, then you would all be happily settled, and then suddenly 30 more people would come in. And they would make space. But if you're feeling a little cramped, of course there's more space out here. Are we okay with air? I think in this room, but in that room, are we okay? All right, good. We don't want anyone suffocating. Yeah. Okay. So, again, thank you all for coming. I believe some of you are, I know some of you are very much familiar with sort of our general topic, Bhakti Yoga. Others of you may be less familiar. I think the word yoga has become quite a common word. People know about yoga. How many of you have done or are doing some physical yoga asana practice? Anyone? Several of you. Okay, so you're familiar. Maybe some of you are yoga teachers? Uh-huh.
One of them are over there.
Oh, okay, yoga teachers, very good. So you'll probably be very familiar with much. What's this part? Oh, now I get real comfort. Okay, so as you know, we focus here very much on a particular sort of yoga called Bhakti yoga, and that's mainly what we like to talk about, and we especially focus on a particular text called the Bhagavad Gita. I believe more and more students of yoga, people who are practicing asana, pranayama, and so on, more and more people are becoming interested. And here comes the water. Let's not put it there. More and more people are becoming interested in the philosophy behind yoga, and in particular, many people are reading, studying the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. They may be studying other works, and some may also be studying the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is so called, although originally it didn't have a name. It came to be called the Bhagavad Gita, but the Bhagavad Gita is composed of 18 of the chapters of the Mahabharata, which is a vastly larger work than the Bhagavad Gita. And it's a section, it's a kind of, I like to call it an interlude. You know this word? Maybe not. Interlude. It's a musical term, isn't it, Sanga? What would be the Croatian word for interlude?
Introduction. Uvod.
Not an introduction. An interlude is you have a piece of music and then there's a break in between.
Between acts, between what act one and act two, there is interlude, you go take a break.
Exactly. Thank you. Okay, so the Bhagavad Gita is something like that. It's an interlude in the story, which is the Mahabharata. It's a massive story, and it's, for the most part, a very tragic story of a war, a war within a family. Hare Krishna. And so that's that would be a whole nother discussion. It's an interlude in the sense that just before the battle, the first day of this battle takes place, Arjuna, one of the main warriors, if not one of the main warriors, on the side of what we call in America the good guys, has what also we might call in America a nervous breakdown when he sees what are he knew already very well that now he sees facing him, ready to fight against him and his companions, his family, his brothers. He sees them in front of himself, and he's practically shocked. That how can I fight against these people? How can I fight against those who are so dear to me? Actually, somehow we're on two sides, but actually we are the same family. So how can I do this? And at that point, he's in such a state of disturbance. He's kind of saying two things at once, and he's expressing his great distress and his resolve to withdraw from the fight. And at the same time, he is open to instruction, advice from his charioteer. And his charioteer happens to be no ordinary charioteer. He is none other than Lord Krishna. And it's because of his openness. He's on the one side resolved, I'm not going to fight. And on the other side, he says, you please direct me, you advise me. And that opening is Krishna's opportunity, and he speaks the remaining 17 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, I mentioned the word yoga, it's very well known. What may be less known is what the word yoga means. And in the Sanskrit language, they have what are called dhatus, which are verbal core words, not even complete words, but from these verbs. What was the word for verb? We learned that today. Glagula. Yes, glagula. Interesting. So the verbal root of yoga is yuj. So you spell it in Latin transliteration, upsilon u yot, you would say, yot. So that's yuj. And this means, one of the meanings of this is to link. Or in English it means, we have what's called a cognate word, and that is to yoke. And the verb to yoke is used when you bring together, well, it can be one, either a horse or it can be an ox, and you yoke the horse or the ox to a cart or to a chariot, and that is called yoga. And it turns out, it's interesting, the scholars tell us that that is the earliest use of the word yoga, is that when there was a battle and the warriors were preparing for battle, they would be strapping up the horses onto the chariots, and that was called yoga. Which is interesting and ironic, because in what eventually came to be called Ashtanga Yoga, Ashtanga, 8-limbed yoga, which is described briefly in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. The first of the 8 yogas, as I think some of you will know, is yama. And yama means moral restraint. And there are 5 principles of this yama. The first of which is, anybody know the first of the 5? It's ahimsa. And what is ahimsa? Ahimsa means Non-violence. Kako se kaže? I always make this mistake. I ask, I have 20 people answer, and all I hear is what is it?
Ne nasilje.
Ne nasilje.
Ne nasilje.
Ne nasilje.
Je.
Ne nasilje. Ne nasilje. Ne nasilje. Okay, so that's the very first part, and it's super foundational to yoga, as explained by the commentators, the classical commentators on the Yoga Sutras. Basically, if you're not doing ne nasilye, you're not doing yoga. Whatever you may think you're doing, it's something else, which is ironic because the original meaning of yoga was getting your horses ready for a battle, which doesn't sound much like ne nasilye. It sounds more like nasilye. That's just how it is. Okay. So, now, what's also interesting, I find, so I mentioned that the Bhagavad Gita, this title, is something which came later. When? How much later? Hard to say. Somehow Indians were not very much into chronology and making historical records. They didn't care because who cares? That's details that in the ultimate, from the ultimate point of view, really doesn't matter at all. Because, why does it not matter? Because yoga is about getting from the world of time and space into a realm which is beyond time and beyond space. So let's talk about getting beyond time and beyond space. Forget about this time and space. In a sense, that's... Okay, so this title came later. Another thing that came later is the titles to each of the chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. And again, don't ask me when this happened. It could be that it happened in the 8th century with the commentary of Shankaracharya. I don't know myself. But that's okay. What is interesting is just that we have titles of each of the 18 chapters, each of which has included in the title the word yoga. And so the very first chapter, which is sort of setting the scene, it's describing this situation with the battlefield and Arjuna with his having his emotional breakdown, nervous breakdown. So you may wonder, so does that first chapter also have a title with the word yoga? And the answer is yes. And what is that title? It's amazing. It's called Arjuna Vishada Yoga. Arjuna Vishada Yoga. It's the yoga of Arjuna's trepidation, his distress. Yoga of distress? What kind of yoga is that? Let's all go to a yoga studio and practice Vishada Yoga. Yeah. Incidentally, the way it is traditionally written, at the end of each chapter you get the title Om Tat Sat Iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita Upanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Arjuna Vishada Yogo Nama pratamodhyaya. That's explaining, this is what this chapter is about. As I said, then each of the chapters has a title, and therefore one can speak of 18 yogas. The Bhagavad Gita has 18 chapters. There are 18 yogas. At which point you may say, oh, okay, so probably one of them is going to be Ashtanga Yoga, and maybe there's a chapter called Raja Yoga, and maybe there's one called Hatha Yoga. Yeah? No. None of the chapters are referred to by any of those terms, which have become fairly well known in the present time. But maybe before we go into that a bit more, I want to say a little more about the modern history of the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita, we understand as a very ancient text. According to the tradition, it was spoken by Krishna, it was recorded by Vyasa, and this was according to the understanding of history as best as it's understood in the beginning of the present age, or not quite the beginning of the present age, at the end of the previous age, what was called Dvapara Yuga, and that is commonly said to have been something more than 5,000 years ago. Anyone remember you were there? Suddenly I had a flashback. I remember, I was there. Maybe. But the Bhagavad Gita then became a text that was of special interest to Indian philosophers, most famously Shankara, generally dated to sometime in the 8th century. What do they say? 780 to 820, or yeah. And what he was concerned with, and what others, his teacher and some before them, and possibly going further back in time, but we don't have records of them. They were concerned with a particular way of doing philosophy, which came to be known as Vedanta. Vedanta, Veda, Anta, the end of Veda. Veda, in its broadest sense, simply means knowledge. And this, I think you have a cognate in Pravatsky. Yes? Vid means to know. No? Vid, to see.
Vid to see.
Oh, vid is to see. To know is?
Is not that.
Oh, yes. Okay, so that's cognate with jnana. Jnana, yeah, from which we have gnosis, so on. So it started to become quite prominent from at least the 8th or 9th century, when these teachers of Vedanta wrote commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit language. They would write commentaries. They were interested in communicating with others who could read Sanskrit. So they didn't really care very much about people like us. It just didn't occur to them that, we would... It really apparently didn't occur that there could be people outside of what we now call India who might even have a capacity to understand what they're talking about. So they just said, okay, forget about all those people. We're going to, in our little groups, we're going to talk about Vedanta. And then this discussion, what is the ultimate truth? This was the subject of Vedanta, based on essentially three texts. One was the Bhagavad Gita, one was the Brahma Sutra, the Sutras, also called the Vyasa Sutras, and also called Vedanta Sutra. And the third source was actually several works called Upanishads. There's a collection of works, and of those several works, about 10 to 12 or 13 of them were identified as essential reading for anyone who wants to know what is the ultimate truth, Vedanta. So these three became the source of this discussion on Vedanta, which continues from that time up to the present, in which there are debates, and the debates are sometimes quite intense, like, you got it all wrong, we got it right, you got it wrong, we got it right. And this is why, and they go into highly, highly technical discussions. For Shankara, the Bhagavad Gita was a bit of a challenge. And it was a challenge because the Bhagavad Gita is clearly a theistic work. And for Shankara didn't have a problem with theism as such, but he had a problem with the idea that ultimate reality is God. He wanted to say, no. There's something beyond your idea of God. That's nice. That will help you. And if it makes you feel good, that's fine. You can do Bhakti yoga. That can help you, and eventually it will bring you to jnana, to knowledge. That was. I'm a little bit, simplifying and stereotyping, but essentially that seems to have been his idea. So then, over the centuries, others, the teachers of the Vaishnava tradition in particular, or traditions, wrote extensive commentaries arguing. Basically, everybody starts with Shankara and either argues with him or against him. It's either you're with us or you're against us. That was the thing. But Shankara had a bit of a challenge with the Bhagavad Gita because of its clearly theistic position. Now, okay, we're talking about titles of the Bhagavad Gita chapters, and I'm bringing this up because we're a little bit advertising. What's the word for advertising? Reklam. We're doing a bit of advertising because we now have this little book which is intended as a summary of the Bhagavad Gita. It's called Osamneist Yoga Bhagavad Gita. He's laughing. Did I say it wrong?
No.
On the back it says, now you can really laugh. Ovdye ye predstavljena Bhagavad Gita po poglavnina. Poglavnina. What means poglavnina? Chapter. Okay. Kako pismo stekli predodžbu. Predodžbu o osnovnim okvirima ovog dijela te kako bismo zvrnuli pozornost na različite načine na koje je yoga predstavljena kroz čitavo dijelo. I won't make you suffer anymore. I originally wrote this for translation into Chinese, into Mandarin. I sometimes visit China, but it's been more than 3 years now with COVID and all this, but I was also teaching for some time in Chinese University in Hong Kong. So, and also yoga is popular in China. They have a lot of yoga studios. They have yoga studios there that would amaze you at how fancy they are. And very high class. Marble everywhere. And some yoga retreat centers, beautiful traditional Chinese architecture. So, so I was thinking, how can I help people to appreciate the Bhagavad Gita? Because they're interested in yoga. I thought, well, just take the title of each of the chapters of yoga, of the Bhagavad Gita, and then give a short summary, but focusing on that particular theme of each chapter. So that's what we've done. And I also wanted that the book be published in China legally. A lot of things get printed in China illegally. People just pay some money to somebody and they print. But I wanted to have a legal publication. But to get a legal publication in China,
Comes with complication.
yeah, it's complicated. They have, there's a censorship process, and it has to go through that system and get all the stamps before it's approved, and then you can publish it. And the editor that I was discussing this with, of the publisher that I wanted to publish with, it's an academic publisher, he was super enthusiastic that, yes, let's publish this book. But he also said, if we get approval, it will be a miracle. Because the subject, as I mentioned, is Bhagavad Gita is a very theistic book, and theism in China, ooh,
Doesn't click.
you can say anything you want, just don't talk about God. Yeah. Somehow or other, by a miracle, it was approved.
Wow.
And by another miracle, we have a translation in beautiful Hrivasti language done by none other than Lakshmi Priya Devi Dasi. Anyway, okay, enough reclame. One of the chapters, the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, is called Raja Vidya, Raja Guhya Yoga. Raja means king, Vidya means knowledge. There's different words for knowledge. Vidya. Vidya can also mean something like technical knowledge, skill, knowing how to do something can be Vidya. And Guhya means secret or confidential. So it's understood, the Bhagavad Gita, Rajavidya, it is, you can translate either as the king of knowledge, or it could also be translated as the knowledge for kings. At which point we all turn off and say, well, I'm not a king, and I'm never going to be a king, and I don't want to be a king, so it's not for me. No, it's for all of us, because it's also the king of knowledge. It's the highest knowledge. Rajavidya, Rajagita, Pavitramidam Uttamam, Pratyakshavagaman Dharmyam Susukam Kartam Avyayam. The word sukha means happy, happiness. Susukha means really happy. And avyaya means perpetual. So it's a teaching which Krishna is explaining is actually a perpetual knowledge. It's something it's always there. And in fact, it's always there. Yeah, it's within us, but it's very much covered. And how is it covered? Avritam jnanam etina jnanino nitya vairita kama rupena kanteya dushvarena anandina cha. Kama rupa. The word kama, you know, there's karma, but there's also kama. They can be related, because when we respond to kama, we act, and that action, that is karma. And the result of karma is bandhana. It is bondage in this world. Bondage is something we all experience. What is the bondage? It's the bondage of the whole sum and substance of our conditioning, which manifests physically as our physical bodies. That was a little abstract, but take it the other way around. We all have physical bodies, and these physical bodies have wonderful capacities, and they also have limitations. Have you noticed? Yeah? They get tired. They get hungry. And guess what? Here comes the bad news. As we get older, it all gets more and more difficult. Now, in yoga practice, physical yoga practice can help us to minimize, to reduce, in a certain sense, overcome some limitations of the body. And there is discussion in the third part of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali of how by samyama, various meditations on different parts of the body or different objects, one can actually develop powers which go beyond our ordinary comprehension of how the physical world works. Siddhas, in other words, we can gain some powers. I remember years ago, there was this wave when I was, before I kind of said goodbye to America many years ago. There were a lot of teachers coming from India teaching various sorts of yoga and meditation. And it seems that one of them was promoting some sort of yoga in which you could actually, presumably, maybe some of you know how to do this, to levitate Do we have any levitators here? Not yet. We are working on it. Yeah. So that is a yoga siddhi, that one can actually become lighter than the lightest. He's trying for that in his own way. It's called motorcycle yoga. Where was I? So Rajavidya Raja Guhyam Pavitram. This is pavitra. This is pure. This is not mixed with motivated practices. Motivated means we're doing it, for some selfish benefit. We're doing it for some recognition. We're doing it for some ulterior motive. How would you say ulterior?
Like inner motive.
Yeah, no, but it's ulterior. It's for some other, not for. Prakrivani. Okay. Yeah. So pavitram and uttama. Uttama means ultimate. It's topmost. I mean, this verse, some have said, yeah, this is Krishna advertising, reklama. So yeah, but it's Krishna who's doing the advertising. So when Krishna advertises something, yes, it's Arjuna recognizes that Krishna is someone very special, not just special, but supreme. And at the very end of the Bhagavad Gita, Sanjaya, who has been narrating the Bhagavad Gita to Dhritarashtra, the blind king, at the very end, he reports to Dhritarashtra, he says, Yatra Yogeshvaro Krishna, Yatra Partha Tanurdara, Tatra Shri, Vijayo Bhutir Dhruvam Nitir Matir Mama. It's my opinion, Matir Mama, that wherever there is Yogeshvara, Krishna is described as the Yoga Ishvara, the Lord of Yoga. Yatra Yogeshvaro Krishna, Yatra Partho Dhanurdara, and Partha is another name for Arjuna, and he's also known as Dhanurdara, he who holds a bow. Tatra, in that situation, wherever these two are together, Tatra Shri, there will be four things. One of them is Shri. What is Shri? Shri is a very ancient word from Rig Veda, which means all kinds of good things. It means wealth, it means power, it means beauty, and all mixed together. Shri is opulence. There will be the presence of Shri. What else? Vijaya. There will be victory. There will be, Tatra Shri Vijayo Bhutir, Bhuti, there will be great power. Bhuta, power. And one more, because if you have Shri and Bhuti and Vijaya, you may say, well, there's a lot of really nasty people in the world who have those things, who are making trouble for a lot of other people in the world. So Sanjaya says, there will also be niti, and niti can be translated as morality. These four in combination will be there, he says, wherever there is Krishna and Arjuna. Excuse me. So where is Krishna and Arjuna? It's in the Bhagavad Gita. They are together in the Bhagavad Gita. They are conversing, speaking. So if one takes the Bhagavad Gita focusing on the yoga aspect, I think it can be very interesting. There's many ways of reading. The Bhagavad Gita is altogether 700 verses, which is, I mentioned before, relatively very short compared to the Mahabharata, which is, something like 100,000 verses, although the critical edition is, I think, 75,000. 700 verses. Someone posted on Facebook, I just saw it this morning, a recitation being done in Dallas, Texas, by 2,000 children. You've seen it? 2,000 children reciting by memory the entire Bhagavad Gita. They had prepared intensely for 1 year prior to this. I think they had an advantage. The advantage is that when you are, 10 years old, your brain is like a sponge. You can just soak up so much and remember. For me, it would probably take 20 years. In any case, Bhagavad Gita is can be heard, read in so many different ways, but one way that I suggest can be very nice is to focus on the yoga aspect. In our Bhakti Yoga Center, we understand the Bhakti at the Bhagavad Gita is really about Bhakti. There will be those who say, no. The Bhagavad Gita is about Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, Vijnana Yoga, Rajavidya Rajaguhya Yoga. And yes, there's one chapter that's called Bhakti Yoga. It's one of the shortest chapters in the Bhagavad. Chapter 12 has only 20 verses. So, you're saying the Bhagavad Gita is all about bhakti, but no. It's about so many other things as well. Okay, if you want to read it that way, that's okay too. Krishna is very liberal. Krishna just wants us to, he wants us to take steps to get out of the darkness in which we find ourselves, in which we implicate ourselves, in which we, even if unintentionally, we hurt others. He's showing a way how to take the steps. It can be gradual, it can be by leaps and bounds, it depends very much on us. But this is very much the opportunity that Krishna is giving us. Yatra Yogeshwaro Krishna, Yatra Partha Danuga. Tatra Shri. What else? Bhuta. Niti. There's one more. Vijaya, we got it. Okay, Tatra Shri Vijayo Bhutir Dhruvam. Dhruvam means definitely, certainly. Nitir Matir Mama. Oh, well, that's Sanjaya's opinion. Yeah. But again, the Bhagavad Gita is being read, it's being studied since centuries in the modern age. It was first translated into English in the year 1785 by one gentleman in India, British, named Charles Wilkins. It sort of leaked into Germany, and the Germans really got into it. and the French also. I don't know when the first Croatian Bhagavad Gita was done. But now we have our Srila Prabhupada's Bhagavad Gita. When I say Srila Prabhupada's, he emphasizes, this is Bhagavad Gita as it is. Why as it is? Well, because he is following in a line of teachers. Yoga teachers know this. You learn from another teacher. You don't just learn from a book. So he learned from his teacher, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, Saraswati Thakur. He learned from his teacher, Srila Gorky Shordas Babaji. He learned from, well, it's a little complicated, but he learned from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, and so on, going back to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Sri Krishna Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the early 16th century. That's the immediate tradition, and then we can trace it back earlier. In this way, we have quite some opportunity to benefit from Bhagavad Gita. Hare Krishna. Thank you all for your kind attention and patience. I hope I didn't speak too quickly. I did okay? Your English is... Okay, thank you all. Hare Krishna. Is there anyone have a burning question you want me to clarify something? You want me to read a chapter of the Gita? Everybody's so hot, they're like, okay, when is this going to be over? Here comes it. This is dear Samir. Yes, Hare Krishna. You have 5 questions.
Come closer.
First question.
I was thinking about this, but Tony, I just want to know your opinion about this.
We talked about disciples asking gurus for their opinions some days ago. Where were we when I talked to them? Was it in Split? Watch out. That's all I can say. We won't go into it. Okay.
So, when Krishna was preparing to get born in the family, Kamsa took every one of his brothers and sisters before him and smashed him, killed them.
Brothers.
Brothers,
Yeah.
yes. Is it the virtue of Vasudeva that he let it happen, or should he has been fighting to protect his family?
Okay. That's an interesting question. For those of you not familiar, this is... the question was about Krishna's birth and prior to his birth. Whether or not it was sort of moral and proper for Vasudeva, not Vasudeva, that's in the name of Krishna, his father Vasudeva, to not fight against Kamsa as he was murdering one child after another, the six brothers of Krishna. All right, this is a quite complicated story, described briefly, relatively briefly, in the 10th book, the 10th skanda or canto of the Srimad Bhagavata Purana. So it's not Bhagavad Gita, it's another work which is much longer and which is very much focused on the life of Krishna. Bhagavad Gita is Krishna's conversation with Arjuna in a particular episode within the lifetime of Krishna, who, by, we would say, worldly calculation, lived in this world for some 125 years. That's what the tradition says. So there's quite interesting complexities about Krishna's birth, which involves stories behind stories and so on. And so it's hard to elaborate. But to your question, was it appropriate that Vasudeva did not fight against? He was in no position to fight against Kamsa. He was chained. He had no weapons. He didn't even have his fists. He was in a position of helplessness. We could say, no doubt, he would have done all in his power to fight against. However, your question may be, well, yes, but how is it that he actually presented his first child to Kamsa? How is that? How is that? Is that that Vasudeva had made a promise. And the promise he made was that you can take my children and do what you feel is necessary, because it's not the first, not the second, not the third, it's the 8th child of Devaki who is foretold to be the cause of Kamsa's death. It is the 8th child, it is not any before that. But just so that you feel reassured, you can do whatever you like with the children as they appear. And to demonstrate that, he offered, he said, here's the first child. And initially, Kamsa said, no, it's okay. It's not the first, it's not the 7th, it's the 8th child. Until Narada Muni, that Narada. I tell you, this Narada, this troublemaker. Devarshi Narada, this great sage of the Devas. What does he do? He says, Kamsa, what makes you think? I mean, okay, it was, the prediction is that it's the 8th child. But who knows, it could be any of the other children. What do you think? And so he fed him this virus. And Kamsa became so anxious, yes, I must kill one after another. So that was not Vasudeva's fault. Vasudeva was offering. You take. If you want to blame someone, blame Narada.
I would just like to explain why I asked this question.
Oh, okay.
Because I have cows, and eventually the bull comes around the bull.
The wolves?
Bull.
The bull.
The bull, yes.
Yeah,
Because the cows give birth to
right,
males
bulls.
and females and
Yeah.
so on. So when I get the bull, I do not have the capacity to take care of him, and I sell it to someone else, to some Kamsa, to do whatever he likes with it. So this is
it is what it is.
It is what it is.
behind this question. So I'm trying, because I see that many disagree with this practice,
Yeah,
and they teach me what should I do.
yeah,
But simply try to find the reason why I'm doing so. So I found this story, also some parallels between these two stories. Like,
Well, your parallel is quite a stretch, I have to say. Good try. No, the problem is, I understand, it is a problem for devotees who would like to care for cows, but then how are we going to care for the bulls when they're born? Well, the Croatian government should be funding, that's actually how it should go, is they should be funding facility for keeping bovines throughout their natural life. The governments are subsidizing milk, isn't it? The milk that you buy in the shop is subsidized, which means that if the government didn't pay something to the farmers and so on, it would actually cost so much more. The real cost of milk, of cow milk, is so much more than what you're getting it for. And what we've found in England, we have, there's a group of Krishna devotees, a small group, who have started an initiative called Ahimsa Foundation. And they've made an agreement with one farmer who is providing them the land and also the barn facility. Good, first-class barn facility and plenty of land for keeping cows and bulls so that they can live out their natural lives. And then the milk which they're producing, they are selling for something like 3 times what you pay for it in the shop. And because it's ahimsa milk, people value it that much, and they're willing to pay, and they have a waiting list of 1,000 people who would like to also get the milk, but they only have like 15 cows giving milk now. So it's going to a very limited customer base. So that would be, so the answer to your question, I think, is let's focus. We have to see the realities now, but we also should be looking at what we would like to see. What we would like to see happen. And if we keep looking there and talking about it, we may start finding ways that it can be done. There may be ways. I don't know immediately. I don't have a simple formula. But I think instead of taking the easy way, we want to be thinking of, so that we can be showing people, so we can say, this is how we do it, and this is how it's possible to do Go Raksha, Go Seva. Is that okay? I think it's how we got on cows. Well, cow protection is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita. It's the dharma of the Vaishyas. The Vaishyas do Krishi Go Raksha Vanijyam Vaishya Karma Svabhavajam. So we have a Vaishya doing Go Raksha. Right.
Simple question.
Simple.
Question.
For opinion. You want an opinion?
Yeah, no. I want your instruction.
Uh-oh.
When we chant Hare Krishna, is it Krishna or Krishna? Krishna?
Oh, this is a big question.
Because I see some.
Because if you do one and you get it wrong, you may be missing the boat, right?
I just want to know which is correct.
20 years now, 30 years, I'm chanting Hare Krishna, and then now they tell me, no, you got it wrong. It's Hare Krishna. Okay, where does this question come from? It comes from the fact that in Sanskrit, what we transliterate as an R with a dot under it, it's called a retroflex R. And the way it gets pronounced in eastern India, this is Odisha and Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu, maybe other places, I don't know. They really make it kind of like an R with a U, Krishna. Hare Krishna, Krishna.
Yeah.
That's South India. And then in northern India, it's more like Krishna, Krishna. And then you go to Bengal, and it's Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Ramo, Hare Rama, Ramo Ramo, Hare. That's another one, right? Some say, it's not O, Ramo. Yeah, in Bengal it is. So the answer is, depends on which part of India you want to be identified.
That was the point.
That's the point. If you listen to Srila Prabhupada's chanting, I don't think he's chanting Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So, I mean, he was from Bengal, but he also doesn't chant Hare Krishna. But, you know, his chanting is really very nice.
Just follow that.
So, you can hear how he's chanting. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Is that okay?
Yes.
Uredu. What is our program now? Oh.
If it's okay, we can sing a little bit more. Till we prepare dinner and I think it's okay.
Okay, about how much time for that? Well, let's call it, it's open-ended, which means also as we sing, they can
Wants
come
to
in.
go, we will serve.
Huh?
Who wants to go earlier?
Yeah,
we will
whoever
serve.
wants, yes, feel free. Feel free to do prasadam yoga. Okay. Oh,
See, there should be a table over there. Kind of malo stol. Da. Tam. Zelen.
Okay, the first signage, Kana.
Ja. Ovaj.
E tako. After him.
Hare Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Harinam Sankirtan ki jai. Bhakti Yoga Center ki jai. Ananta Bhakti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai. Gaur
Krishna Kshetra Maharaj ki
Držimo se dalje uz večeru,